Hello. Today we're going to take a look at the module A2 in the transferring or transforming data to databases course as part of RRC Polytechnic's. This is going to be for the IT operations program. Now I know this content was originally developed for the Data Sciences and Machine Learning course at RRC. But this implementation is going to be more for the IT operations program, and as such, I'm going to focus a little bit on slightly different aspects of the content. This document is available in Learn under Module A under the SQL module in the course in Learn, of course. So we're going to take a look at a couple of things right now. Last class, what we did is we installed the MariaDB server. And when we installed it, everything ended up in our C drive under Program Files, and then there was a folder called MariaDB, and the version we installed was 11.1, so the version of the file, the directory name I should say, is MariaDB 11.1. And in this directory we have a couple of folders that we really want to focus on. There's some shared libraries, there's some included stuff, there's a README, which you should always read. But there's the bin directory that contains a lot of executables. Two primary executables is the MySQL.exe and the MySQLD.exe. That's the server process that is running in the background, as well as the MySQL.exe, which is a command line front end that will give us access to do things such as create databases and run queries. We'll look at that later. Okay, so that is the bin directory in our MariaDB 11.1. The other one is the data directory. The data directory has a bunch of data files, including the configuration for the MySQL.ini. Okay? So those are the two big things with regards to the directory structure that IT ops people, sysadmin people should understand. Now, is MariaDB or is MySQL running? Let's take a look. I'm going to right click on my taskbar and I'm going to select Task Manager. Now, by default, Task Manager doesn't start up this usually the view isn't this good, but we're going to leave it as this. Fewer details, there it is. Usually it starts up something like this. Task Manager starts up and just shows you what's running. And what we want is the More Details option. That'll open up this, which will allow us to see not only what programs are running, but what tasks might be running in the background. And that's how MariaDB server is running. It's running in the background. If we scroll down through the background processes part, down to the M's, you will see the MySQLD.exe. And when you click on that little item next to it, it expands to show you that MariaDB is running as well. So we can see that our MySQL server, or Maria implementation of our MySQL server, is indeed running on this system. Okay. Now you can right click here and go to Open Services to show the services dialog box, but generally what I prefer to do is to hit the Start menu and type in Services, and it will bring up the Services application, which effectively brings up the exact same thing. I'm going to resize this a little bit so it's a little easier to read, and I'm going to put it in approximately the same spot. So the feeling I'm going to zoom in on this in the video. And as you scroll through, you will see that the MariaDB server process is running. It's the MariaDB database server. It is running. It starts automatically and it logs in as a specific NT service under the username MariaDB. which is, from a security point of view, a good idea. You never want these things to run as administrator in Windows. You want them to have their own unique user ID from a security point of view. Should they be compromised, they will not have administrator access into the system. So it's always good that they are run as someone other than the administrator role. Okay? You can right-click on that and take a look at the properties. And when we take a look at the properties, it tells us what it's doing. It's running the MySQL.exe, and also, and it's a little tricky, but if you start at the beginning and you just keep highlighting, you will highlight the entire line. Right-click, copy, and I'll bring this up in Notepad so we can dissect it a little bit better. It's something I didn't do in class, so I hope you take a look at this. All right? So I'm going to put a carriage return there, not that it needs it, just to make it a little bit more readable. Okay? All right? So it's going to execute the MySQL daemon or server process that we saw that's in our bin directory, and when it runs, it's going to load the my.ini file, again from the data directory, which we saw as well. Now this is important. We want to understand what configuration file it's using and what executable it's using, just for troubleshooting purposes. Again, you're going to be systems people. You need to know how to find these things out. The my.ini is actually where the configuration, part of the configuration for this process runs. In the Windows world, now in the Linux world, in the Mac OS world, those are more Unix focused. They're going to be a little bit different. We're going to focus just on the Windows world. It is typical in the Windows world that configurations for executables are in one of two places. One could be in the registry editor, which you probably just saw a blank screen there when I did that. And this is a little dicey. We're not going to go into the registry editor. We're not going to go around and mess with these things because you can literally make a system unbootable. But it is common for application developers to use the registry to store settings for applications, including applications like Maria. Okay, that's one place. Another place may be an INI file, as we see here. We take a look at the data directory, we see the my.ini file right here. Now the notes make reference to using Notepad++. Notepad++ is a great text editor. If you're going to be a systems person, Notepad++ will serve you well in your career. But as students just starting out on your career, you want to take some time right now, determine what a good text editor is, one that meets your needs now, that will meet your needs in the future, and get comfortable with it. Around 25 years ago, maybe longer, I started using this text editor called Ultra Edit Studio. It was Ultra Editor back then, but it's now called Ultra Edit Studio. This version is from 2006, I think, 2008. I don't know when I first got my license, but I've been using this for a very, very, very long time. Okay? There's no point in checking for updates. I don't have a license for updates anymore. But that's fine. It does what I need it to do. It is a text editor that I first started using when I first started developing websites back in the 90s, and it has served me since. And this is why I tell you, take advantage of figuring out what text editor you want to use now. Now, I went in and I told Ultra Edit Studio to open, and by the way, I do not suggest you download or purchase Ultra Edit Studio. It is expensive and it is a yearly subscription. And first off, your students, you don't need to pay for a yearly subscription. And second of all, there are free tools that are available. There's Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. That's fairly reasonable. There's a couple of other free tools. And as I said, as systems people, Notepad++ is a very effective text editor for modifying files such as this. Okay? Now, normally you wouldn't see that, so we're just going to ignore that that was there. That's a change I made before when we were in class together. When it loads up, it looks something like this. Now, if you want to change your data directory, as it mentions in the notes, this is the change you would make here. However, you need to ensure that whatever changes you make here, this data in the data directory is also in that directory as well. Okay? You don't necessarily need to move the my.ini file, but you do need to make sure that the log files, the performance schema, and all these other things, because these are actually existing databases in Maria right now. There's a MySQL database, there's a performance schema database, and there is a sys database. Each one has its own directory, and they have their own config files as well. So if you're going to use a different data directory, make sure you make copies. I'm going to advise against that. It's a great idea for those in the DSML course doing data sciences work. For those of us in the systems course, the systems-like course of IT operations, I think the defaults are fine. Okay? So, we're not going to change our data directory. If we do take a look at the notes, however, and I know I haven't been following the notes very well, there is one change that we do want to make. We want to add a slightly different setting. So we've got a buffer pool size. The buffer pool size is basically the amount of RAM that you're going to set aside for Maria to use as a server process. And it typically grabs about 1/8 of your available memory. On my system, I've got 32 gig of RAM, so it's setting aside just under 4 gig of RAM to use with Maria, which is fine. The other thing we want to do is we want to set a page size. This is how much information we want to move in and out of our memory at a time. So we're going to add this modification. The MariaDB page size, we're going to copy that, and we're going to add it, as the instructions say, just above the buffer pool size. We're going to put it right there. Okay? Before we do anything, we should always have backups. So I made a backup of this yesterday so I can change it today. I've got a backup. I've identified myself, SMJ, as the creator of the backup, and I date timestamped it. Well, just the date. So I've got a backup in place, so if everything goes horrible in my edit, I can revert back to my backup. Of course, that won't happen. Okay? I've made a change. See the change there, so I can say Control S and save that. Now these changes will not go into effect until I restart my instance of the Maria database server process. We do that in our services app. We right click and we select restart. Okay, it will go through a shutdown and then it'll restart it, and it says the process is running. Perfect. Now that was fast, but it did restart the process. And you know this because if you have a typo, and again, this is why we have backups, but let's say I have a typo. I just say my page size is 16. I forget the M, or the K I should say. I forget the K in the 16K page size. So I have a typo. I save that and I go into my services and I say restart. And what happens now is it says, there's something wrong. And I say, okay. And it changes Maria and it says it's not running. It says for the status, it has it blank saying it's not running right now. Okay, so I need to go in and figure out what my error is. Oh, I need to have a K at the end of that line. Okay, try that. Control S to save, and I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to try and start my service again. This time there's no warnings, no alert boxes or anything, and the status changes to running. Huzzah! I have reconfigured Maria with a small modification and the server process is running again. This is how you know that you have successfully configured Maria to use changes in the INI file, the initialization file, that it looks for when it starts that server process. If you have any questions on this, follow up with your instructor. Thank you. For the second part of our video, we're going to take a look at launching the MySQL executable that we looked at in the first part of this video. If you recall, when we were taking a look at the directory structure for the instance of the MariaDB, there was a directory called bin, and in that directory, that's where we found our MySQL or server process for the MariaDB. But there was also a MySQL.exe. And I mentioned at the time that's the client command line only interface into the server process. And we're going to take a look at that today. Now, yes, we could launch that inside of a command prompt window. We could go CMD, open up a DOS window, and actually take a look at the executable here. But I want you to maybe consider, as systems people, using PowerShell more than the command prompt. So hit the Start menu and type in PowerShell, and it will open it up. Now, you don't necessarily need to open it up as an administrator for what we're going to do today. You can just open it up as a regular user, but we are going to zoom in just a little bit so you can more easily see on Google what it is I'm doing here. So just let me rearrange it a little bit so it's a little bit more. Yeah, that should be good. Yeah, that should be good. Okay. Now, in an ideal world, we're just going to fire this up and type in MySQL and start a process. But as you can see, it's saying, no, I don't want you to do that. Now, why are we using PowerShell? PowerShell lets you do things like right-click, Control-C, and then Control-V. So it allows you to copy and paste a lot easier than trying to copy and paste inside of command prompt. Now, command prompt has gotten better over the years, but PowerShell is just better. And if you're going to be a systems person in a Windows shop, you need to be comfortable in PowerShell. Let's start getting comfortable in PowerShell. Okay? So the problem is that MySQL executable is not easily found. Now, we could do a full path to it. We could say C:\/ program files, \, and it was MariaDB, \, bin, \, and I'm hitting the tab to autocomplete these things, and it adds the \/ for me. And I could type in mysql.exe. We'll be looking at this in a bit. User root -p for the password. And, prompting for the password, I should say. Okay, it didn't really like what I did. I hit enter twice, so that's not fair. So let's try that again. It wants the password, and if you remember, it was your initials forward and backwards. So it's SJJS. Okay, so this works. It does get me into it, but that's not the best way of doing it. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just type in MySQL and have it fire up the MySQL utility. The way that we do this, as we see here in these notes, is to modify the system or environmental variables for our instance of Windows. And specifically what we want to modify is the path environmental variable to look for an executable. In Windows, in Linux, in the Mac, in most operating systems, there are some exceptions, but in most operating systems, there is a place to look for executables when people type in commands. When you type in a command, it's not going to look across the entire file system for the commands. On many systems, that would just be prohibitively difficult because it might include network shares. So what we do is we say, no, don't look everywhere for an executable. Look here, and look here. The more places it has to look, the little bit longer it might take to launch executables, but it's certainly better than looking across entire file systems and potentially network shares. This was really a thing back in the day when we all had to set up Novell networks. However, right now in Windows, it only looks in a couple of places. It is not looking in the right place for the MySQL, executable. We need to do something about that. And what we do is we take a look at the environmental variables. So again, I'll hit the start button and just start typing environment variables. I want to set up environment variables, edit system environment variables, and that brings up this dialog box. Now I really can't zoom in, so I'll probably zoom in on this in the video in YouTube. But what we want to do is we want to modify the environmental variables. Once we click on that, it opens up the environment variables dialog box. And as I said, the environmental variable that we want to modify is the path variables. So we select path and we click edit. And what we want to do is we want to add a new path to look for executables. It looks in Windows apps, it looks in Ultra Edit Studio, it looks in Ultra Edit Compare, those are those text editor things I was telling you about. It looks for Java executables, and it looks for GitHub executables as well. And I want to add a new one. I want to add a location for it to look for MySQL executables. Now at this point, I am going to go back to Windows Explorer. I'm going to go to my C drive. I'm going to open up program files. I'm going to scroll down to Maria. And I'm going to go to the bin directory. Okay? And once I have the path that I want to add to that environment variable, once I have it, I can simply click up here and I have something that I can nice and easily copy. Again, what did I do? I launched Windows Explorer, I navigated through my file system until I could find the bin or the executable directory for the implementation, the installation of my Maria database. Once I found that directory, I clicked on the address, right-click, copy. Now I have that path copied to my clipboard. I can go back to the environmental variables dialog box, click new, and paste it right there. So I now have a path to the directory, or in Windows we call them folders, but I'm a Unix guy, I keep using the term directory. But it is a folder. It's both, but Windows uses the term folder. I have the path to the folder called bin that has the executables in it that I want to be able to run. Once I've done that, I click on OK. I can verify, I can click on edit, I can see it's still there, perfect. OK, OK, and OK. Now if I try running MySQL again, it's still going to complain because it started this session with the old environment variables. So I'm going to type exit here. I'm going to Windows run PowerShell. Opens up a new PowerShell window. I'm going to make it a little bit easier for you to read. That should be good enough. And now when I type in MySQL -u root -p, it finds the executable. I've reloaded PowerShell, I've reloaded the environmental variables for PowerShell to use, which includes the path to the executable MySQL. Now it just wants the password, and the password is your initials forward and backward if you followed the lecture notes from last week. Now that I have it, I can do the commands that are actually in this week's lecture notes, okay? And you can see some of these here. You can take a look at some of these. Actually, you can take a look at it is module B1. Taking a look at some of these things, okay? So take a look at these. Well, let's take a look at this now. Let's take a look at this together. My computer is really acting a little bit wonky, so I'm going to stop the recording right now, save that recording, and I'll start up a new recording and we'll take a look at database command line commands using MySQL command prompt. All right. At this point, once you have it running, you can do the \Q to exit out of it. That's the one I've always used. Apparently, you can also use exit. I've never really used that. I've always used the \Q to quit the MySQL command prompt. And I've used this in Linux for years and years and years. It's not my preferred open source database management system. There's some issues around licensing. They've gotten better over the years, but there are some issues around licensing, so I've always preferred Postgres, as we covered that first week in that LinkedIn activity. But right now, we're using MySQL, and I've always used the \Q to quit. Either one is fine. Okay, I'll see you in the next video segment. For this next part, we're going to take a look at some of the commands that are available to us in the module B1, the command line interface, connecting to the database and doing some basic commands. Now, a lot of these should be very familiar to you after having done the LinkedIn Learn activity. You've already seen a lot of these things, but they're in a different database environment. The joy and beauty of SQL is that a lot of it is very similar. A lot of it is exactly the same regardless of the database engine, be it Microsoft, MySQL, Maria, Postgre, IBM DB2, any of these database engines. They should all have the same syntax for some of the fundamental things. It's when you get into the programming environments around them that they can be different from one or another. It's out of scope for this course, so it's not something I really want you to worry about. Some of the variables are different. Some of the date functions are different from DBMS to DBMS. And that's the big hang up for some, is the date functions. What works in MySQL might not work in Microsoft or Postgres database engines. However, a lot of it is the same. And that's a true elegant beauty of the SQL programming environment. As you saw in that LinkedIn Learn demonstration, it's not really a programming environment. SQL is more of a scripting environment with very limited functionality, and it doesn't have things like for loops or while loops or if structures. Those structures are added by the vendors in their database management systems. For example, if you want to do a for loop or a while loop, you have to program those in the language that the database management system uses. One of the more popular ones is the Oracle PLSQL programming language environment. It's designed to program and work around the limitations of SQL. And it is handy. One of the more popular, in my experiences, one of the more popular implementations of that is a technique called programming for database triggers. So when somebody creates a new record, or somebody deletes a record, or somebody does something to the database, an event occurs, and that event triggers a program. And that's a very common implementation of programming outside of the limitations of SQL. You would not do that in SQL. It does use SQL, but it is a superset of the SQL programming environment and is not part of the ANSY's SQL specifications. So that's what SQL is, a very brief introduction. You should see this already in your LinkedIn Learn activity that was assigned week 1. Let's take a look. So first thing we want to do is connect to our MySQL. Now, in the last segment, we modified our environment variables to allow us to connect with the MySQL command. With this, you want to specify a user with the -u switch. And the only user we have so far is root. We set the root password when we installed it last week. We also want to prompt for a password. we can't supply the password here, okay? That's not how this works. If we type that, it would try to connect to a database called password. That's not what we want. If we want to tell it to connect to an existing database, we would specify it here. What we are telling it is, launch MySQL, log in as root, prompt me for the password. And it's prompting me for the password. And if you follow along with our lecture notes, the password is your first initial, your last initial, and then your last initial and your first initial, where your initials forward and then backwards. I don't know how I managed to mess up typing my initials, but here we go. I'm sure you've heard me say this already. Typos will get you every time. If not, you will hear me say it a lot because it happens a lot. Now, some of the things we want to take a look at. Well, let's take a look at the databases that we have. This shows us all the different databases that we have available to us. And we haven't created any new databases, so these are the standard databases that one gets when one installs either MySQL or, in our case, MariaDB server. Okay? Everything that you do inside of these database management systems, all the configurations, all the settings, almost all, because we saw the INI file, but once you get into creating databases, creating tables in the databases, storing those table information, column information, relationship information, primary foreign keys, all of that information is stored in the database itself. And specifically in Maria and MySQL, it's stored in a database called information schema. So let's take a look at this. Now, before we can look at any of these databases, we have to say connect to that database, or in this environment, use. All right? So I'm going to say use information schema. Control C, Control V. I used the control keys on my keyboard, Control C to copy, once I had it highlighted, and then Control V to paste it. Makes it very easy to do, which is again why I'm recommending you get comfortable using PowerShell. All right? Now you're supposed to have a semicolon at the end of any SQL statement. I'm sure you saw that in your semester 1 IT fundamentals when you did the basic database course there, but as a refresher in the LinkedIn Learn content from week 1. If, however, you forget the semicolon and hit enter, it doesn't really matter in this case. Okay? It's going to be a little bit more forgiving. So, now that we are in the information schema database, we can tell it to show the tables. All right? And again, we should use the semicolon, but this time, when we forget the semicolon, it starts a multi-line SQL script. It's saying, okay, you've started a script, what do you want to do next? Because I didn't see a terminating character. Terminating character, of course, being the semicolon. I can add the semicolon here and hit enter, and it will show me all the tables. Very good. There's a couple of tables in here. There's the user variables table. There was another table. I can't remember what it was. I should really be following the lecture notes. So let's take a look at the lecture notes. Once you are connected, you have to use semicolons. We'll be getting into a lot of information schema. Okay. Once you're in, you can say select database. And this is actually a little bit different. This is actually a function. Anytime you see something that has brackets like this, chances are it's a built-in function inside of the DBMS. In this case, there's a function called database. And what it does is it returns the current database that you're connected in. You may say, what is the point of that? And the point is that you may have some general scripts that you can use across different databases in a specific database environment. and one of the first things you're going to do is tell it to pull the database information and use that in the subsequent sets. So when I say select database, it should tell me what database I currently have selected. And it is, again, information schema. So that's a handy feature. It's also something that hackers like to use all the time when they're trying to compromise a database when doing some hacking. It's a trick that hackers use. If they can figure out what the database is, they can start using that database, start querying what tables might be in it, and carry on from there. Okay. The next thing we want to do is to show some tables. Now when we say show tables, again it's an SQL statement, we have to terminate with a semicolon. It will show us a list of tables. Most of these are system tables, but there are tables in here that will tell us some very important information. For example, there is a table called tables that stores all the table information. There's a table called views. You can create special views into these tables or multiple tables. There is a table that talks about the columns. All right. There's a table that talks about, I just saw it, where is it? Keys. That's not the one I was looking for. Views. Oh, it's gone. I saw one. Or user variables. That's one. That's not the one I was looking for. Character sets, columns. It doesn't matter. Anyway, all of these tables are available to you, and this stores all the information. So all of this information can be stored as part of tabular information, which means we can query it once we're inside that database and inside that correct table. Okay? And in this case, the table was, we haven't selected the table yet. But once we do, we can start looking at specific information. Okay? The table we are going to take a look at is collations. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Now you can do describe like that, but we're just going to do DESC. It's an abbreviation of the describe variable in MySQL. And the table we are looking at is collations. Just like that. And when we do that, it gives us a list of columns, or what it calls our fields. So there's 6 different columns that are available to us in this database called collations. It tells us what types of data they are, all right? Varchar, big integers, whether you're allowed to have null values or not, okay? No, yes, yes, no, no, and the default is null, which, if you're not allowed null, but the default is null, it's a little weird, but whatever. If there's any primary foreign key information, it might be stored in this column as well. Okay, so it's telling us information about the table collations in the database information schema. Next thing we talk about, and it's all explained here, we can select information from the collations table. We can select the collation name and the character set name from collations, and we can set a where clause where the character set name is UTF-8MB4, and we can sort it by the collation name. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to see what the results are. Now, you can type these things if you want. Right click, copy, right click, and when I did right click, okay, I did right click and it pasted and it kept going. Now there's a problem here in our code. That's what's going on. Yeah, it didn't like that. So I'm going to have to type it in because there's a semicolon here and there's a semicolon here. And SQL does not like that. You're only supposed to have one semicolon. So we can fix our code here and try again. All right, so that looks a little bit better. We can paste that and see what happens. It doesn't like that. course it is. So we're going to do select collation I'm going to select collation name, character set name. I'm just doing Control C, Control V from collations, where character set name is equal to UTF-8MB4, Control C, Control V, and I'm going to do order by collation name. And because I don't say ascending or descending, it's going to assume ascending. So when I hit that, oh, I failed to realize that I have been kicked out of MySQL. So let's try this again. Okay. Use information schema. Show data tables. There's all my tables, including collations, and that's the one we are going to run now. This should work. Let's try this again. Control C, Control V, much better. Much better results set. I had missed that I was kicked out of the MySQL prompt. I should have been paying more attention. My apologies. I'll maybe even edit this out if I probably won't. Okay, so it's selecting the collation name, character name set from collations, where character set name matches this, and then it's sorting by the collation name. And here's all the different collation names that we can use. Okay. With that information, we can now take a look at creating a database. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a database, and that database name is going to be based on our information. The database, we are going to, for example, my name is Stephen J, so my database is going to be SJ. My student ID, well, I don't have a student ID, I have an employee ID. I'm not comfortable with sharing that with the class, so I'm not going to use that. So I'm going to call my database SJ_box store. All right? So that is going to be the code that I use. I'm going to go over here. In the database name, I'm just going to say SJ_box store, just like that. I'm going to use the character set, and I'm going to use this collation here. And basically, what a collation is, and we don't really cover this much in the class, but what it is, it's a way of doing character sorting and comparison. With the globalization of technology, it's far more than just standard English characters. So you need to be able to consider and encompass other people's languages, other people's characters into your database. This character set should allow that, but now that you have all these different characters that you might have available to you, how are you going to compare them one against the other? The default isn't bad, but this Unicode CI is actually a little bit better for a lot of those activities, and that's the one we're going to use in our box store database. So now that I have my script nice and ready to go, highlight it, Control C to copy, go back, and I'm still in the database here. All right, I can Control V, Control C, Control V, and paste it. It now says it's created a database called SJ Box Store. Now I am still in information schema database. I am not in SJ Box Store database. Okay. However, if I show databases, my SJ Box Store is right there. Perfect. I can use SJ_box store, just like that. Perfect. Show the database. a syntax error now. It's interesting. Anyway, again, I'm not going to. Those of us who even know these things sometimes have errors. Select database, show tables, select database. Doi. Much better. So now I have the correct database in place. Please ignore what's going on behind the curtains. Okay, so at this point we've created a database. Now we'll cover into some of these concepts here later. However, going forward, we're going to need to start creating different text files. I've already started here. I've got some stuff going on, and I may want to save this, as the notes say, as a cheat sheet.sql. We're also going to start creating an SQL script for creating and populating our bookstore database. We'll get into those next class when we actually start taking a look at some GUI tools, but that's one of the things that's covered at the end of this document. I would like you to take a look at it. Okay. The next thing we are going to do is we are going to install a database graphic tool called dbeaver. We will do that together in class. In our next class, I hope to see you there. That's it for me for now. I will be making this available to you in Learn. It will be a link to a video in YouTube. We'll talk to you later. Bye.